welcome to today's Think Global Forum Roundtable. You're very welcome to be joining us live, or if you're listening to this on a recording, we appreciate it. Today, we're going to be joined by Dr. Simon Moore, and we're very excited to hear all about this wonderful topic that we have lined up for you today. Dr. Simon Moore is a CEO at Innovation Bubble, a chartered psychologist, and Dr. Moore is also an author, and he presents regularly at international conferences, employing psychological science, which helps brands develop stronger employee and consumer understanding of their brand relevance. And I know a lot of our audience is very interested in brand and brand relevance. We're also joined today by Minter Doyle. Minter is a professional speaker and a consultant on branding and leadership, and also transformation. He's also an author and a filmmaker, a director on several boards, a non-executive director, and he's also a former executive, I know, from L'Oreal. So Minter's very welcome. And we're also joined by Val Brown, and Val works with many CEOs and CMOs, actually, around the world, entrepreneurs, business owners, and has worked with many leading brands, some that you will know, like the Hard Rock Cafe and MTV and Nashville Country Music Hall of Fame, and many others. So it's wonderful that we have some experts joining us today. And of course, Maria Roja and myself, Simon Hodgkins, are here to help us go through the proceedings. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to you, Dr. Simon Moore, because I know you're going to take us through a brief presentation on this very interesting topic. And then Val and Minter and myself and Maria will be joining you afterwards to really discuss this topic in a little bit more context for the roundtable discussion. So over to you, Dr. Simon Moore.
So let's try and kick off, because I know we would like to get into some discussions around this. And what I'm trying to do really today is I've kind of cherry picked through stuff and trying to think about how I might engage or inspire you to think about how psychology can add sort of further impact or ROI to sort of some of the work that you might be engaging with, whether that's at brand level, organizational level, whether that's B2B or B2C. I know lots of you are kind of obviously working in these areas. And we work across many sectors. To us, it makes no difference whether we're working in health, whether we're working in travel, retail, fintech. Given the fact that we're psychologists, it's the people that we're interested in. So you'll probably be familiar with the fact that many of you collect data on different points of your audiences. So, who they are, what they do from maybe a transactional point of view, or their job roles, how they do stuff. Again, quite interesting. And then maybe when they do it. So these are all really interesting data points. And I suppose psychologists, their role here is to kind of go, what could we add? So that's interesting, but they're quite static points. So, who doesn't change that much? What they do can be quite kind of same, because people get into habits. When they do it again, people kind of do rituals. So why do they do it? And a conversation that I often have at board level, when we finish a meeting and you come out and everyone's agreed that they know their customer, they know their audience, you get in the list with these people and they whisper at you. I don't really know why people do stuff, to be honest with you. A lot of it is assumption. A lot of it is trying to triangulate the static data and kind of just guessing what's going on here. So we made a very conscious decision about 10 years ago to think, how can we help here? How can we kind of bring some other dimensions of data in that might explain why people do stuff? And I suppose many of you have had the problem, where your audience has told you one thing and done another, or you've engaged in a project or a piece of work and it's been less impactful than you might have hoped it might have been. And that's probably because we're missing data. And I'll explain the data that we might be missing, and hopefully it's kind of something that you could add to the things that you might move forward, sort of in terms of the work that you might have planned. And again, it applies equally to B2B, B2C. It makes no difference really. But the fact is that from a psychology point of view, there's lots of value there, because I suppose we often think of our audience in a very pragmatic, practical sense, and we think they are quite robotic and computer-like in their decision making. And you know what I know about humans, which is rather unfortunate because I'm one as well, is the fact that we don't make very computational decisions. We're not very logical. This is shocking. We don't like numbers and statistics. So pricing and all that businesses actually causes us stress, which is really interesting. And we live much more in the non-conscious world than we do the conscious. So we're not always aware of why we're doing stuff, which is interesting because if you're trying to find out how you become relevant, how you engage, how you inspire, how you build that kind of loyalty and trust with people, if you ask them or you use very traditional methods, you're going to get very conscious kind of data back, and that means basically it's probably inaccurate, or it's kind of missing large chunks of the reality. And it's not that your audience is lying to you. Many of us don't really know or probably underappreciate how kind of much we are influenced by these non-conscious factors, and we're going to talk about it for you today and give you some examples. The next 20 minutes is going to be interactive, so you know, I learn by doing, and I thought you might do the same. So I'm going to give you a few things to do as well. I can't see you all, but hopefully you'll play along with me. But you'll probably quickly see what I mean about the human brain, that it's kind of full of errors, it's problematic, and we do kind of require other ways and special kind of methods to look at how we surface those more hidden influences on organizations, brand, and business, for example. So, you know, in the work that we've done, just to kind of give you a really broad overlay, you know, psychology inserts itself across the business, really, whether that's looking at brand communications and how you might get people to understand your product or your service better, whether it's augmenting the messages around marketing impact or relevance, whether it's looking at how audiences make decisions, you know, even specialists. So we work a lot with kind of health consultants, financial experts, and even they are subject to these kind of cognitive biases. So, you know, experience, unfortunately, does not eradicate these kind of nuances and problems that we have, that the brain causes for us when we think about things. And we can think about audience segmentation and even things like creative concept or advert testing. So if you've got ideas about how you might want to market your brand or product from an advertising point of view, we can look at, you know, the story of it, the visuals of it. Are they going to be things that your brain remembers, that it engages with, is relevant to them? Or, you know, are people just, it's just going to wash over them? The numbers of adverts that we've looked at and tested with people where they just really can't remember anything about them. And, you know, which is a bit sad because clients have spent millions and millions on them for large parts of their audience to kind of have no impact. So, you know, it's quite a broad kind of gamut of input that it has. But I'm going to give you some examples of why psychology is relevant, for example. So if I can ask you a question, given I can't see you, I'm going to rely on the fact that you'll play along with me here. I would imagine, hopefully, the majority of you have a long-term health plan. So you want to stay healthy for as long as possible, I would hope. Now, you've probably got a plan to that, and you do all sorts of things consciously to try and help that along. Now, that's great. But I'm going to call out a few things to you, and let's see if you do any of these things. So how many people have takeaways? So who drinks? Who has fizzy drinks? Who knows if they've got aluminium in their deodorant? Who amongst you spend too much ruminating on mistakes and kind of missed opportunities? How many of you snack between meals? Who works too late and does too long hours? And here's a really nuanced one. How many of you cook with olive oil and fry stuff with it? Now, if you answered yes to any of those things, you actually do not have a very good long-term health plan, because all of these things have been shown to be kind of inversely related to long-term health. So this is the dichotomy of human beings, the fact that we can think that we're engaging and moving forward to a desired goal, but unconsciously, with lots of little things around us that we do that we're probably not even aware of, we derail those efforts. And that's exactly the same for your B2C and B2B market. Your target audiences don't intend to not do things, or don't intend for them to kind of not think about what you're saying, but they're busy people, they've got roles, they're spinning lots of plates. So there are lots of reasons why they throw lots of kind of their decisions and their thinking into this kind of very automatic part of the brain. And we'll talk about that and what does that mean in terms of kind of engagement and kind of decision making. So look, there's all sorts of kind of facts here. I mean, I just chose 3 at random across 3 different sectors. Big differences between what people say they're going to do and what behaviorally they end up doing, which is a big problem for us in terms of business and brand. If we can't lock down what they do, then how do we know what we should do for them or engage with them, for example? So you can see here, big differences in numbers, you know, 82% down to 0.2% of reality, which is a massive big difference. And these are not untypical of differences in percentage of engagement, of stated versus real kind of behavioral output. And it happens in travel, health, retail, everywhere, childcare. The difference between what you say and what you do is they're miles apart. And that's a big problem for brands. And how do you then be assured about acting on your insights if you do any? So if you do any customer or client insights, how do we actually know that these are the real causes of what they might do next? And this really is because the brain actually works in 2 ways. It's got 2 decision-making systems. You've probably heard of this a lot in the media with nudge theory and stuff, but it kind of goes beyond this. So in terms of survival, it's actually estimated that we're in terms of a cognitive effort, we are at our most busiest time in human history. We've got lots to think about. Okay, so we've got a mobile phone that we have to attend to. We have a computer that we have to attend to. We've got friends and family we have to attend to. We've got a job that we have to attend to. We've got a social life that we have to attend to. Loads of plates to spin. And as a consequence of that, even the most smartest people in the world only have so much cognitive capacity. And what tends to happen, in order not to fry itself and tire itself out, the brain shoves lots of decisions into the automatic space to try and save itself effort and not tire itself. So, you know, think about it. When those of you drive, you probably remember 3 things: getting in the car and getting out of the car, and maybe if you had a near miss accident on the way. If I asked you what happened after 23 minutes, you're probably going to be completely oblivious. And that's quite scary, isn't it? To think that you are driving a big chunk of metal at a fairly high speed amongst lots of other big chunks of metal that are driving at high speed. You're not very consciously aware of that moment. And that happens in life in general, through lots of different kind of aspects of your life, including consumer behavior, including business behavior. So try something for me here, and I want to show you how your brain doesn't work as well as you think it does. So I want you to read this sentence on the right-hand side, and very quickly, although I can't see, I want you to put your fingers up and tell me how many letter F's for Freddie are in that sentence. And if you haven't done that by now, you're going too slow. Now, I would imagine, you're lucky you're not on camera, so I can't embarrass anyone. You're lucky if you've got more than 4. Okay, so I would imagine the estimates are going to be anywhere between 2 to 7 letters that you've identified. The actual number is there are 6 F's in this sentence. And what you've probably done, some of you may be quite smart and have kind of worked these out, but many of you have missed the obs, and there are 3 obs. And you'll see, and some of you are probably going, oh yeah, I've done that. So your brain is not a computer. It does not systematically look through data and kind of messages. It actually does a very quick scan and does an estimate of what it thinks is in front of it. And that's exactly the same with your marketing message. That's exactly the same with your sales message. That's exactly the same with your website messages. People scan, and there's a difference between what you write and what's in front of them and what their brain processes. And I'll show you some more examples of this in a second. Don't feel bad. We all do it. Okay, so it's not that some people do it and some people don't. Everybody is susceptible to these problems. So it goes to show us that the brain is much more intuitive and kind of emotionally charged than it is by pragmatics and logic. So how we feel or want to feel about something very much influences how we kind of perceive what we get from that message, as an example. So if you look at the brain, generally speaking, it engages about 1/5 of the effort of the brain likes facts and figures. So the front part, this part, I've got a nice part of brain to show you. I've got this part here, it's called your central executive. That bit, which is quite tiny, that bit loves numbers, it loves facts, it loves figures, it loves statistics. I'll go back to a word I said, it's tiny. The vast majority of your brain, 4/5 of it, does not like numbers, it does not like facts, it does not like logical arguments, it likes how it feels about something. So very much gut-based feeling of, does that feel right? Does that feel safe? Does that feel likable? Does that feel kind of, I don't know, nasty? Quickly, I'll judge it from that point of view, because I don't want to spend too much time because I've got lots of things going on. So what happens is, from a kind of a brand organizational kind of positioning point of view, because we think people are very logical and respond to kind of logical call outs, we will think, how many, if you think about it, how many of your brands have the word, we are trusted as an organization, we're a trusted brand? That's an overused word, okay? Or you can trust us as a brand, for example. Now, unfortunately, trust is a psychological concept. It's not earned on instruction. You trust by experience. So for example, if you think about your friends, the ones you trust the most are the ones that make you feel emotionally safe, engaged, positive. The ones you don't trust as much don't meet your emotional needs. So there's something going on there that you kind of go, well, they maybe feel a bit awkward, or I don't trust them as much because I don't feel safe necessarily in talking to them about everything. So trust is very emotional. It doesn't work on just listing the fact that our values are around about trust. It's very much about what you do and whether that aligns to what your target audience needs from you, for example. And the common mistake is that brands, I like to use this analogy. So imagine going on a blind date and you turn up at the restaurant and you kind of sit there nervously for a few minutes, wondering if your date's going to turn up. And the date does turn up, and that's a kind of big tick, relief, at least they've turned up. They sit down with you, you get excited, you think, okay, we're gonna have a good conversation here, I'm gonna learn all about you. And all they do is talk at you for 20 minutes about how good they are, how great they are, what they've achieved, what they're going to achieve. And you kind of go, oh, this is not the conversation I really wanted. And I don't really think I'm going to go on a second date with this person. Well, I've probably described what brands do all the time, is they just talk at customers or clients all the time, how great we are, what we've achieved, what we're going to achieve. Look at the great products and services that we have. So what happens is you're using very pragmatic, kind of practical messages to try and engage an audience, when in actual fact, they want to hear more emotional messages that relate to their needs rather than your needs as a business, for example. And then we've got on top of that, if that's not complex enough, you've got all sorts of other things that the brain needs in terms of influencing what it pays attention to. So for example, human brains are predominantly kind of, I suppose, skewed towards threat than they are opportunity. That's interesting because lots of brands churn out new products. Okay, here's a new thing you can have, a brand new shiny toy you can have. That's an opportunity. Well, what we know about human brains is that if you're given a threat or an opportunity, what happens is you concentrate on reducing the threat than you do about grabbing the opportunity. So in actual fact, many brands and organizations would probably spend their money more wisely eradicating the stress and the strains and the bumps in the road of their customer experiences and their product design or their service designs than they are about, here's the latest iteration of this new big swanky new product. You'll get more engagement with it and actually more kind of impact on your long-term relationships if you remove the things they don't like, okay? Because there's a natural kind of gravitation to threat. Obviously, it doesn't feel good. Feeling stressed does not feel good from a psychology point of view. You know it. Think about when you last feel kind of stressed. What you want to do is you immediately want to get rid of it quickly as possible. It's like a hot potato. Want to get rid of it. So that's why your brain will actually kind of prioritize threat than it will opportunity. So we get some of these things around the wrong way from a psychology point of view in terms of how we might engage and how we might kind of, I suppose, relate to people. It's exactly the same with the word frictionless, which I hate as a psychologist. And I know obviously business like to use it. And I'll give you an analogy. Okay, so if we make everything easy, so we make everything easy for our clients and our customers, is there any value in that? So do I get a sense of achievement? Does my ego improve because I had to invest a little bit of time and effort in that, and it's made me feel good because I did get there in the end? Whereas if someone just gives it to me, well, what's the expression? Easy come, easy go. I can walk away. I've got nothing invested in it. Now, I'm not saying you make everything easy. So, for example, if you're thinking about a holiday, most people, their emotional investment is, I've had a really bad day at work. I want to go home, grab a cup of tea or a glass of wine and think about where I could escape to. And I want to enjoy that moment of exploration. I don't want to land on a website and they go, in 5 minutes, you've got to choose one of these 3 hotels. Everyone's choosing it. They're all going. The rooms are going now. Quickly, buy, buy, buy. And you go, okay, that's not the experience I was looking for. I don't want that to be quick. I want to enjoy and feel actually intelligent. I found a really good deal or a nice holiday that no one else is going to. That's going to inform me and make me and kind of, intelligent, meet my needs. What I do want to be frictionless, though, is when I've gone through that long selection process and enjoyed the process, I want to buy it quickly. That's why I want the frictionless experience. So we're getting these kind of terms from a psychology point of view. We're applying them with a really broad brush that can actually break your customer journeys, when in actual fact, part of your journey might need to be frictionless. And part of your journey actually might need to be expanded in terms of the time that's invested. I'll give you another example. We talk about business loans. What we found is that companies get more customer traction and longer term relationships when they slightly artificially elongate the decision point of whether they're going to loan the money to you as a business. So rather than making the loan in an hour decision, if they've done it in an hour and a half, 2 hours, what happens is psychologically, people think you're doing more due diligence. It's safe. They're more reassured by that process. It's funny, isn't it? Nothing happens. It's just we just delayed it by that amount of time. None of the process changes. But the perception of the audience is significantly altered by doing that, by actually elongating it. So we tend to kind of use this knowledge. Hopefully you can see how it can be useful in organizations to say, hang on a minute, that's not how the human brain works here. It's a good idea and it might work on this part, but you have to be more careful on this part, for example. The other problem we have, I'm talking about problems all the time, I know, but this is the common problem we go in and help organizations is your audience is not static. Your customers, your clients, you might know how old they are. You might know their job title. That means nothing to me as a psychologist. These are just throwaway labels. You haven't worked out what they need from a psychology point of view. And also, this is interesting, have you worked out, are they more motivated about being someone more like they'd like to be, which is moving towards their ideal self? So in other words, I'm not quite where I want to be personally at the moment. I want to be more like this. Or are they someone who's like, I don't really want to be like myself anymore. I want to get away from it. So I want to avoid what I'm doing and who I'm seen to be at the moment. And that's an avoidant self. Now, as a business, you have to work out in terms of how you engage with them, whether are you dealing with their ideal self or are you dealing with them as an avoidant self? Because those two kind of identities require two very different engagement systems. The ideal self messaging will not work with the avoidant self messaging. And there are ways that you can identify this with your audience very quickly, but lots of organizations just see their audience as very static in terms of age, socioeconomic status, job title, which are okay and interesting data points, but they only let you move the dials very finitely. Unless you have the understanding about what your audience needs, what's relevant to them, what engages them, what inspires them, you will never move the dials very much. So this is why we kind of layer these kinds of activities within organizations to try and find out how we can, rather than you have a 10% chance conversion, how can we get it up to 70% chance? I mean, the first job we have to do is how do you, as a business, get on that long line of spinning plates that they're already doing in terms of job, family, social life. That's the first task. Just because you've created a great marketing message does not mean to say they drop everything and look at it. You have to first get some perceptual space in that consumer's head, even put them on the line to think at some point, I'll look at quickly what you're doing. Okay, so lots of brands just think that people just drop stuff and go, okay, I'll spend 5 minutes looking at this. At very best, what we've worked out in the last 10 years of working with organizations in terms of looking statistically at how long they spend looking at your message, You're lucky if you get 7 seconds initially, which is quite scary, but that's how quickly the brain works. Very quickly it will assess, this is not relevant to me, don't like the look of this, this is not part of my identity, doesn't support my values, for example. And they may be wrong. And this is where we get into what we call alpha and beta perception. Yeah. So how many of you would, if you came down in the morning and found that on your kind of sofa, how many of you would suddenly run back upstairs again? Probably quite a few of you. Actually, it's a hair clip. Okay, this isn't a spider. It's the hair clip. But this is my point, and I'll give you an actual example from a brand here. So mortgages, okay? There are lots of people who are on a mortgage, overpaying on a mortgage, who could be on cheaper mortgage rates. And the banks are like falling over themselves going, we could save you money, why are you not changing? And they assume that they're lazy, they're confused, or they just don't trust the bank. And some of those things might be correct, but they're not the reason why people are overpaying their mortgages in the main. What we found was when we worked with banks is that actually this overpayment is a kind of conscious behavior. They're doing it on purpose, which sounds crazy, but they're doing it on purpose because they see it as an insurance. I don't mind paying £1,300 a year extra for my mortgage if it means that it keeps me away from filling in forms, spending time I don't have, answering questions I can't answer about changing my mortgage. So in actual fact, in order for me not to feel dumb or stressed or challenged, because I perceive that the changing mortgage process to be really long and kind of arduous, I'll just pay that money. And it actually keeps you away from me to actually do all that. So it is actually an insurance payment. When you reframe the message and say, well, actually, how long do you think it takes to change kind of an insurance? And people will say days to you. And then you reframe it and go, well, actually, it takes on average about 7-8 hours on your part. Then they kind of go, oh, I didn't realize that. So this is the difference between what people perceive to be reality and what is actual reality. And your consumers and your clients are always in that. What you know as reality is not what they are working on. There's a big mismatch between you have this product and the service, you know what it does, what it can't do. That's not the same as your target audience perception of that. They have a different opinion about what it does, what it doesn't do, what it can do for them, what it can't do for them. And it might not be accurate, but that is their reality. So the job of psychology is to bring those much tighter together to ensure that people don't go off and do their own perceptions of what's happening. Because what happens there is they're going further and further away from your ability to engage them, because they're in their own world rather than in your own brand world, for example. The last thing we'll talk about are these kind of various sort of biases. So there are 300 or so cognitive biases that we all have as humans. I'm not going to bore you with all of them. I'm going to give you a couple to give you some examples. So one of them is what we call ego protection bias. So we're all quite fragile people. We all like to think we're smart. We all like to think we're individual. We all like to think we can contribute, that we matter. And so this is all brought on upon us by our egos. So we kind of worked with an insurer, and at that time, insurance is all about getting the cheapest price. How can I get, and grow my market by saying that our insurance policy is the cheapest? And we worked with Aviva, and we sort of dug around at a psychology level and found out that people are not actually really bothered about price, so to speak, to start with. What they're interested in is, how can I not look unintelligent when I'm thinking about taking an insurance policy out or changing it? Because you're going to ask me what locks I have on my door. I've got no idea. I should know, it's my house. And now I feel stupid, for example. So already that conversation has got off to a negative emotional start. I'm now associating my bad feeling with you as a brand because you've asked me awkward questions. This relationship is going nowhere. So what we did with Aviva, for example, is rework the customer journey to go, don't ask awkward questions about locks and windows and all that sort of stuff to start with. Ask them, why are they getting insurance? What is it they're trying to protect? What are they trying to do? Are they trying to insure the car because they want to go, on off-roading and great adventures? Or is it they've got to go and visit Auntie Doris every sort of weekend to give her shopping? What's going on here? What are the main reasons psychologically that these people need you? Once you know it, then engage with that. Yes, you're going to have to talk about price at some point, and you might probably going to have to ask about, you know, the logistics of their house. But don't start on the kind of wrong emotional foot here, because you are immediately churning your audience just by the process you are doing it. So why don't you reorder it, for example? And it worked. And all of a sudden, what we're seeing now is we saw a big shift in the insurance kind of market based on, you probably remember some of these adverts that we kind of helped construct around the difference between putting someone on the spot as opposed to a more relaxed approach of, well, what is it you need to protect, for example. The other one that we get a lot of in lots of industries is what we call overconfidence bias. This is really interesting. And this, I'm going to kind of finish off on this kind of area now. So this is interesting. So, like, you know, I was talking about financial consultants. So 300 professional fund managers were asked if they actually thought they had above average ability. And no surprise, about 75% of them said they did. Yeah, so 75% believe that they were above average at investing. When you looked at their portfolios, that wasn't the case at all. Of the remaining 26, thought they were average. Now, statistically, this is impossible. You're going to get some people who outperform and some people who underperform. But this is this kind of notion of overconfidence. Yeah, it can be also underconfidence. And I'll show you what happens here. So we have the ability to look at what people tell you from a conscious point of view and think, is that true from a non-conscious point of view? And let me take banking and saving. So most banks will try and attract their clients or their customers by saying, you can trust us, we're a great brand, we invest your money, you'll get a good rate of return, it's safe with us, which is all very well. But what they're forgetting, and they're not understanding, is that people overstate their confidence at their own financial prowess or ability. If you ask most people, and we showed the banks this, so we just got, I think I remember this, we got 10 people off the street in, got them into the room and asked some questions about their bank. And we said, when do you get paid? Oh, I know that. Do you know when you're in debt? Yes. Okay. Where's your money get invested? No idea. How much interest rate you're on? I've got no idea. Where does your money get invested in? No idea. How much is your overdraft facility? No idea. How much do you pay for your over? No idea. And this ranged from, actually, there were 2 financial consultants in there. So people, because it's embarrassing to admit you don't know what you're doing with your money, if you ask people, they'll say, yes, I know, and it's really important to me. Yep, yep. So don't ask me about my confidence. What are you doing as a bank to impress me? So what we did is we turned it around and said, as a bank, don't talk about how great you are. Talk about how great you are at improving the confidence of your audience. Don't call them out on it and point fingers and go, well, you don't know what you're doing, do you? Very subtly do things that actually improve your audience's confidence. And what you might find is it will build a relationship with them. And that's what we found. When we did this with banks, they actually got their biggest kind of conversion rate over 2 years than they'd ever had by very subtly changing the message and the point of engagement with people and not listening to what they were telling them. Go, no, 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 I know what I'm doing with my money. Don't talk to me about that. Tell me what you do as a bank. Non-consciously, that was not true at all. So it's really interesting how psychology can go in and almost do, you can lift up stones and have a look to go, is that true? It can give you a sense check of how much is that true? Why is it not true? So it gives you lots of kind of reasons about why that might not work, for example. So lastly, just to finish off for 2 minutes, the other thing we have to think about is this thing I mentioned about needs. Okay, so many people talk about price and discount and quality and quantity, pragmatic reasons again. Yeah, but the best messages that work with your clients and your kind of consumers is, what do they need? And that's not necessarily what they need from you, but what do they need in life in general. So some people are all about what they might gain. So if you think about cosmetics, it's I'm going to gain confidence, or I'm going to gain, someone's going to go, aren't you attractive? I'm going to gain more admiration, for example. So that's about gain. So I would be engaged with you if you tell me what your products do to help me engage and gain something. That's my need. Another person might be about maintain. What do I keep? What am I not going to lose? Makeup, for example, is going to keep your looks. You're not suddenly going to look old and tired. Great, I want that because I don't want that, you know, my kind of business or my team to think that I'm getting kind of tired out. That's great. I use that. So my message is about maintain. Gain is not in, gain is not interested in me. Maintain is. So if you think about what your audience needs, whether it's a client, whether it's a kind of consumer group, you then suddenly get the messages cores that you could actually reach out to them, that they relate to, they understand, and they engage with. But it's that deep level. It's not, price. Everyone's shouting about price. It gets confusing. If we've actually demonstrated to lots of brands that the more you shout about price, the more confusing and stressful it gets for the consumer. Okay, because everyone's shouting about it. So you're actually causing stress because you're giving them a number to remember that they now have to go and do some homework on to go, is the number you're telling me better than their number or their number? I didn't want to do all this work. Now you created a load of hassle for me. If it feels right though, now I'm listening. Tell me a bit more about it. This is why for us as psychologists and consumer and organizational behavior, needs are paramount in understanding how you might engage your audience, how you create that better ROI, for example. And look, you can do it quite easily. So if I know this, I can now give your sales team, I can now give your kind of like complaint teams ways of identifying what the need is of your consumer audience by the questions they might ask them. So, shall I show you what other people have done? Or would you prefer something innovative or different? Well, that tells me whether someone's very socially influenced or whether they have got quite a big ego and it's all about status and they want independence, for example. So there are lots of ways that you can use the psychology, not just to understand and lift the rocks up to go, what is really going on here? Psychology is really impactful to help you carve out, hone, create the message itself at the end. Kind of lock down what's going to work here, in what order, for example. And it works. I mean, I've chosen just some case study numbers, so we use psychology, 12% reduction in churn compared to the past 5 years. Psychology also kind of behavioral introduction, 19% increase in intermediary, not clients in terms, but their clients. So it can even work secondary as well. Lots of interesting kind of ways that you might kind of think about how clients think and work and behave and make decisions. So just to summarize, remember the brain's not a computer. Emotions are really important. I know you've heard this, but it's because it's linked to various ways that people make decisions. And it's all about needs, for example. It's not about the pragmatic cause for action. They will check out your price and they will check out your quality if they have an emotional engagement. If you've given them an emotional reason to spend that effort with you, there's, that's what they need, is that kind of reason to spend it with you.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Dr. Simon Moore. That was very insightful, and also the world's scariest hair clip. So that was great to see.
Yeah.
Listen, I'm gonna bring in Val and Minter. I've got some questions I want to ask you as well. I found there's some very interesting points that you raised, but maybe Val, if I can turn to you first, any initial observations or comments on what we're talking about here today?
Yeah, I mean, it's all fascinating. Thank you so much, Simon, Dr. Simon. But, it's interesting. Earlier in my career, when I was with Hard Rock Cafe, I've worked mostly in experiential businesses. So we're able to observe more. So we get a few clues from that. People would come into the Hard Rock, they'd be very excited. They'd, be able to, be that far from John Lennon's Rickenbacker or Prince's Purple Raincoat. And, and even though, this was earlier in my career, I don't think we were talking about psychology and behavioral science, but what we did see is that, this was very much driven by other esteem and ego. And, and there's a whole other discussion about celebrity, right? And our, relation to that. But people came to the Hard Rock, they bought the t-shirt so that when they went home to their friends, it wasn't, if they were Americans in London, it wasn't a Big Ben t-shirt, it was Hard Rock. So it was a little bit cool. And it was, I've been to London. So we realized that early on, and really our marketing was really about celebrities. It was all PR based. We got celebrities in through kind of altruism, really, because we were letting them do events for free. And that And then we publicized those. And then people came thinking they would see those celebrities, which of course they didn't, because those were private events. But it was kind of a continuum like that. And, you know, we codified it early on. And that was the strategy for many years. It's a little bit different now. It's kind of more ubiquitous. But yeah, it was very important. I think it's not dissimilar to luxury brands in the status, wanting to be a part of a tribe and wanting to be respected. And it's, you know, people want to be accepted.
Thank you, Val.
Definitely, I think so. And it just reminds me of some sort of work we did recently, and it's in the pet world. If you think about the need, the emotional needs, what we showed is that for those people who want control in the world, you know, leads, flea care, worm control, they're all products that the control people want to hear about. But the adventurers amongst us, they want to know, have you got a pop-up bowl that I can take when I'm miles away in the woods? You know, and it's not about the dog or the cat or whatever. It's about them as people. What do I need to show off, fit in, be able to go out and explore, or kind of keep my pet safe because I'm really bothered about, you know, I get anxious about things that are out of my control, for example. So I completely agree. And to your point, Val, I think there are brands out there that are doing it really well at the moment, but I think the vast majority, you know, need to think much more about this kind of area, probably.
Thank you very much indeed. Minter, I'm keen to get your initial thoughts too.
Well, it's actually more a question. As I was listening, obviously I spent a lot of time working on making best hair care products, a little less good hairpins, but when we were working at L'Oreal. And the question of purpose, the organization's purpose, or the brand purpose, as opposed to just the functionality of the product. And a lot of times you'll hear, well, oh, what's really important, I want the right values, but then they just go back to the thing that works best, because that's, you know, I'm pragmatic, or it's the cheapest. I was just wondering to what extent you've explored what insights you might have around the reality of purpose when it comes to customer choices.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I can't talk about hair products, as you probably gathered. I don't have much experience there. But that question is one that comes up a lot actually in the last year. So, and what we find is that I think it's becoming more, I mean, for example, there are some big, I can't name them, but there's some big brands who are actually looking at this very precise question at the moment in terms of, we've got great products and great services, but we know that customers have got a little bit of a bad taste in their mouth about us. And I've seen this happen in, this is quite shocking, I've seen this happen with consultants when we've worked with pharma, and the fact that these people are meant to obviously be charged with improving, saving lives, for example, the quality of life. And I've actually seen consultants choose the second best product available to a patient, not because of its efficiency, but because they didn't like the brand values of the product that would do the best job. And they weren't aware that they were doing it. It was just a non-conscious reaction of like, no, don't like that one, we're going to use this one. And people would just assume, oh, it's because it obviously is more effective and it's peculiar to this patient's lifestyle. When we dig down, it's actually because I just didn't like the values of that brand. So it can actually be really influential. But I think also, to your point, Minter, what happens is people get into habits and rituals. And because I've said that people don't have a lot of time and effort, they naturally fall back on what's easiest for them sometimes. So although they might not really, if they could invest the time, effort and money to look at an alternative, they would probably find that more palatable. But because they don't always have the confidence to think, well, what is the alternative? They're kind of stuck in their head, they're stuck with what they normally do and the product that they would normally use. But they are looking out for a reason to change. But I think from a cognitive point of view, there's more stacked against them that kind of causes that non-change than kind of it brings them into that kind of ability to kind of swap, for example. But it's a great question, and it's definitely something I think now is, you know, given there was a lot of reflection when we were in COVID about sustainability and corporate responsibility and that kind of stuff. I think people are talking about it more. I would agree with you that I think a lot of people are still stuck in behavioral patterns where they talk the talk but don't walk the walk. But as a brand, I would want people to go, I want you to buy stuff, but I wouldn't want you to have a bad taste in your mouth when you're doing it. I'd really want you to kind of like the brand as well, rather than just go, well, we're easiest to buy from, for example.
If I could just follow on that, my line of thinking is around the authenticity or the integrity of the proposition and promise as it sits with the employee. And pharma comes to mind, but beauty products also, where we were fully conscious that the promise from the labs was about splitting hairs, as one, to use now a term seems almost like a theme, so that we knew that we were pulling one over the eyes as an employee with the marketing claim. Oh, and great, it got 36% boost in sales. But inside our minds or rolling of our eyes, we didn't really believe it ourselves. And so to what extent does the proposition need to be sold properly, ethically, within the company? And how much does that have an effect on the outside sale?
I mean, Val might want to come in on this one as well, but I think it's really important now. And I think a lot of employees, given where the whole change that COVID caused in people, I mean, we're talking about the great kind of the job migration now, aren't we? Where people, are moving around more, selecting jobs. I think it's very conscious in their mind that they want to work for brands that align to their own values. So I think it is something that's quite topical. And I think it will become more important in the next 5 years. And I think brands are quite worried about this. And I think it's right to think about it. And it's, what is going on here? Why psychologically? And what might be the impact of that mismatch between I want a job and I want to work for a great brand, but do I actually believe what they're doing is positive, good for the consumer in that sense? So there is going to be, that kind of that mismatch, which will cause people, and some people will obviously act on that behavior and maybe switch jobs. You will probably get a problem in terms of talent attraction as well. I think that's going to become a problem, but people are now thinking about not just the job role. I think to your point, Minter, that they're thinking about the actual brand itself and what it means to them and society as a whole. And I think there are we've probably seen it in the news, there are some big brands that I won't mention that you're probably aware of that are struggling attracting talent as a consequence of directly this.
Val, were you going to add to that?
It was a separate question, but if you wanted to add to it, Simon, please go ahead.
No, please fire ahead. Please go ahead.
I was interested in, I mean, certainly for the brand I was speaking about before, Hard Rock Cafe, it's important, but there's a lot of use of nostalgia in communication. So that's one thing, your views on that. And the other thing is, in addition to sustainability and corporate social responsibility issues that really, became so strong during the pandemic, so did the need for community and connection. And how has that been expressed or played or addressed?
Yeah, that's really interesting. So if I take your second question first, Val, one thing that we have found, and this is I found this really intriguing, is that given that we were in about 2 years of non-control, so we were told what to do, when to do it, there's been a big backlash in terms of the consumer behavior, in terms of rebelling against brands who are trying to control them. So they're trying to assert their independence of, like, you don't tell me what to do, I've had that and I'm fed up with it. They probably will divert back into that behavior at some point. But I think at the moment they're kind of go, I need to express this and I need to be independent, for example. So I think I've had a couple of brands that have actually been quite shocked at the reaction of when they've tried to go, yes, this is going to do this for you and let us control this. They just weren't expecting the kind of like consumer backlash to, don't tell us what to do. We've had that and we don't want it anymore.
Yeah. I mean, I think employees have done that too.
Yeah, definitely. But, and then on your first point, nostalgia, that's interesting from a psychology point of view, isn't it? Because if you think, we can all remember something, and we probably actually misremember it, don't we, from childhood. We probably think it was nicer, or than we thought, I mean, how many times have we like probably come across some sweets that we used to have and thought, oh yeah, they were great, I remember those, or a film that we watched and thought it was a great film, and then you watch it again and go, wasn't that good? And the nostalgia sometimes in your head kind of acts more positively than the actual experience again. So, and that's because nostalgia means I remember a time when I was happy, I remember a time when I was safe, and these are all really big, important psychological needs. So and this is why they work. Now, interestingly, there is a group of people where, from a consumer point of view, nostalgia does not work. Okay, because nostalgia to them represents the old and the staid and the done that and the restrictive. They want the new and the innovative and the new experiences. So actually, they do not respond very well to calls of nostalgia. So that's really interesting. And we've kind of found that group in the last 3 or 4 years. They sort of sit out on their own. So if you take a car commercial, nostalgia will work in terms of remember when you went camping with your family in the car, or you went on some trips or whatever it might be. That won't work with these people. These people just want the car to go somewhere new experience. Don't tell me what I used to do. I've done it. I'm looking forward. What can I do with it? What I've done with it, for example. So a bit of a dichotomy there. But yeah, that's why nostalgia is it really kind of appeals to those deep rooted senses of like pleasure, fondness, all the positive emotions, and people in general like to experience positive emotions,
and a bit of denial as well, right? Because
and distraction.
Remember that. Yeah. Thank you.
If I could make an observation, I was interested about this idea of frictionless, and the idea of the exchange, which we might have, the contract, if you will, implicit in the relationship. And if it's all just super convenient and everything's great, easy in, easy out. And I think of that also for the employee, obviously. But when it comes to almost selecting your clients, to what extent we can impose a selection of our clients as opposed to just accepting every incoming offer. I think of consultants or agencies who are basically always going to say, yes, of course I can do that. I've never done it before in the past, but of course I can. I want that business. And similarly with you're selling a product, this widget, everyone can buy it. At what level can there be? Well, you can only get this widget if you're prepared to jump this high.
I mean, again, great question. And I was only having a conversation about this yesterday with a client. And I actually said to the client, why did you choose to work with us? Because we're not that big. And she said, the reason we work with you is because you challenged us. You actually came back to us and said, there's a better way of doing this, and probably a slightly more economical way. You're the only one who said that out of 6 pitches that we had. And to your point, Minter, I think that's where you can get that kind of, or break that frictionless, encourage your suppliers to be more consultative. I mean, because that's what you're paying for. It's not just a product. You're paying, is this idea good? Will this work? Is there another way of doing it? I mean, if you add that to your service, you're going to be indispensable to that person, because you can get that more out of organizational objective opinion, because you probably describe what happens in the organization as well. Is like, I've got this great idea, and everyone's, oh yes, it's a great idea, it's a great idea. and again, it works with agencies, but I think a lot of agencies now are realizing that they can offer more than just a widget, a great piece of advertising, bit of marketing, bit of social media, that they are starting to say, do you really want to do that? And I've seen, briefs come out where people have gone back and gone, did you want to rewrite that based on this? Because we think, not just for us, but for everyone else who want to apply, we think that's the problem, not what you think the problem is, for example. And I would applaud that, because I think both parties benefit, because to your point, again, Minter, you're not just, doing stuff that's just pointless, although you're getting the money. And that relates to your other point about sort of the more ethical value, doesn't it? I'd rather work for a project where I think I'm making a positive impact and doing something positive than just going, this is easy. It's like, nothing's happening, but I'm getting loads of money. It's like, but I'd rather something happen. And I do actually genuinely think that the majority of people would rather have that than the money, or it will wear off quite quickly. There's something called eustress. I don't know if you've heard about it, but eustress is where you feel that you are a bit of a fraud because you're being overpaid for something that you're not giving. And
I'm writing a whole article on that.
There you go.
I think is the notion of meaningfulness, and if there can be more that sort of abstract quality of the product. Why am I going to buy this one over that? And what is meaningful about that relationship with that brand or with that product, or the nostalgia that you were talking about before?
Yeah, I'm hoping it would be nice, wouldn't it? I'm being positive. Psychologists are generally fairly positive that we move more into that space and less into the let's just throw this piece of bread on the pond and see which duck comes for it quickest and is going to be more effective and just do what we tell them to do. I don't think clients actually want people to do that necessarily. Not many clients do, but for whatever reason politically they may not get a say outright that they'd like to be challenged. But whenever we've done it, we've generally got a positive response. We're not have always won the work, but we've generally got a positive. That was actually quite useful to us.
Can I jump in, because I want to tie a couple of threads up here. We've got a question in the audience about, how important is it for brands to understand the motivational needs, but I want to tie that into something else if I can. And I'd be interested to all of your views on this, because you were talking earlier about, you have to experience that sort of brand relevance. You can't just sort of buy into it or keep talking to them and they'll eventually love your brand. It's an experience over time. And I was just trying to tie that into this understanding what the motivational needs are, but contrasted to your comment about this massive cognitive overload that we're all suffering from. And I think you said when you were presenting, it's probably the busiest time. We've just got stuff coming through all different channels all the time. And does that just mean we're just fighting that noise? Does it make it actually harder or easier for the marketeers and the brand people? Is it just more complex, or does that also offer advantages? I'd just be interested in your thoughts on that.
Val, do you want to go first for a change? I'm just conscious of the fact that I'm doing a lot of the talking first. Maybe one of you want to pop up first would be good.
No, I'm good actually, Simon. You're the star here today, so
okay. I didn't want to be rude and kind of steal anyone's thunder. So, but I mean that's a great question, Simon. And the thing with needs is that they're natural. Okay, so you are going to get someone's attention. So if I know someone is all about the need for control, and I place and position my service or product about you are going to get more control or you're going to keep your control, it's going to cut through all the noise because I'm actually speaking the language that they want to hear. So actually, in actual fact, I'm doing two things. I'm making it easier for them, and they will naturally gravitate to that message because I'm talking the language that they see the world in. And the other thing is that they're going to feel sort of special because they kind of realize that you are doing something for them rather than the brand doing something for itself, if that makes sense. And we've seen that in research. So when I've done things like position a pair of shoes and said, okay, you do your price and you do the quality and you do all your pragmatic descriptions. And let's see if I do that, but then I talk to you about your needs. So I'll say a pair of shoes will kind of make a room to pay attention to you, or a pair of shoes will actually make you fit in your group, or a pair of shoes will actually give you that confidence to kind of nail that presentation. Let's see what the difference is. And on average, you get a 50% uplift in conversion rates if you start bringing those needs in, because you are addressing at a deep level what that person needs. So everything in the world is a prop to everyone. Okay, so there's a philosopher said that the world's a stage, isn't it? And we are just use things for a prop. Well, jeans, clothes, cars, healthcare, they're all means to an ends for us to kind of do what we need to do. And I think it's all great telling you the value of the product, but it's even better if you tell them the value of the product against what it's going to do for their needs, whether that is control, whether that is to stand out, whether that's to fit in. whether it's to predict the future. I don't know what it might be, but there's more meaning for it, if you see what I mean.
Can I just add a follow-on thought to that? So because the world is moving sort of faster than ever in certain markets, does that mean that a corporate client needs to pulse the needs of their customers better, more regular? Because some corporate brands are still trotting out the same messages they did 5 years ago. But when you go through a pandemic or a war or a famine or a flood, things change and needs change. So I'm just wondering, in your views on the frequency now, and has that changed dramatically, or is it still the same?
I think you need to keep a constant kind of finger on the pulse of the audience, for example. And I think the problem is that many organizations sort of lack the ability to really trust what they're getting. And I know that sounds controversial, but the number of times I go into like a big senior meeting and they all go, yeah, we all know this is going to work. We all know this is going to be great. And then you come out and you might be in the lift or you walk down the stairs with them, and whoever you're with will go, that's not going to work at an individual level. And so, but they paralyze themselves because no one's, and implicitly they might not be able to, but it's that ability to stand up and go, yeah, let's just, is this going to work? Let's just lift the stone up and have a look underneath, for example, because it might not be that's the thing we need to do. And on the opposite of that, I think brands are innovating too quickly sometimes. So if you think about the finance sector, I mean, how many apps and stuff do we now have to manage our finances based on the assumption that we're all happy to have lots of apps and digital stuff to manage our finances, given what I've told you and the fact that even myself, I'm like, I don't know if I understand what I'm doing here. And so that creates anxiety for me. So in actual fact, I'd rather not use that app if I don't have to very often, because I'm not sure if I'm making a mistake, how secure it is. So it could be creating the opposite effect. Just because everyone else is innovating does not mean to say that you need to innovate as a business. But to your point, Simon, you do need to speak to your audience. And I think this is the problem with a lot of organizations, is that they, especially with clients, they think that if you speak to a client, that's annoying. If I ask a client a question, I'm annoying them. And the salespeople go, don't annoy the people. They are good customers. Don't ask them any questions because they're spending, and leave them alone. Yeah. When in actual fact, whenever we've done it, the people that we've interviewed have actually fed back to the organization that hired us to do it, to say, I really appreciated that you actually asked and spent some time with me about what I wanted. I didn't find it stressful. I didn't find it annoying. I actually really appreciated that you gave me an hour to just say what I wanted to say to you, rather than just give me a questionnaire or assume what I wanted.
Great point. Yeah. Well, look, we're rapidly running out of time, and I do want to give Val and Minter also another opportunity if there's any sort of last thoughts or questions you want to raise before we wrap up today's roundtable.
Minter? He's got his hand up.
No, saying go ahead, Val.
No, I just thought it was interesting. I wanted to ask, Dr. Simon, are you hired by brands, by the companies themselves, or by agencies? Because I wondered if there was a little friction between the work you do and what agencies want to do creatively.
Yeah, both actually, and it's becoming more common from agencies now. I think a lot of people, and this, I like this, and we do the same. So I mean, we could do creatives, and we could do outputs, and we could do advertising kind of stuff, social media, but we choose not to, because I'd rather work to our strengths. So we're good at understanding what's going on, why it is, and how we might change it. Yeah. And I think a lot of agencies are doing that now. They're realizing that if they do get us involved, we'll do our bit, but it makes their work more robust and has a longer impact, for example. So they do see the value in it. Yeah. So I think collaboration is great. I like the model of, if I've got chickens and you've got some cows, let's just swap a bit, and we both benefit, huh?
Maybe I'll leave a parting thought. So as I was listening to you, Simon, my head was going towards the freedom of the marketer. to do what he or she thinks is right. Once they get the insights and collected, then maybe the needs of the client, so often there's a sort of restrictions that are imposed through corporations and the governance models. And I think it's Christopher Lass's Culture of Narcissism, where he talks about the way we naturally gravitate towards bureaucracies within big business. And in my experience, I worked in a large corporation that had roughly 50 different brands. And many of those brands were competitive with one another. So we have the corporate culture, which means sharing back office, financials, laboratories, best practices, targets, financial targets, and so on, and HR policies. And then we have these brands that are customer facing and in the exact same industry. So at the back end, we're strapped with the same set of people, set of laboratory formulations or whatever. And in the front, we're also strapped because we can't say this or that ESG, really cool, crazy idea, because it's counter to the culture of the entire organization. And so I was thinking a lot about I thought a lot about the freedoms of the marketer or the brands to do what they want within a governance, especially publicly traded governance, with a huge portfolio of brands, sometimes competitive, that end up really at the end of the day screwing the customer because the corporate culture kills through bureaucracy innovation.
Yeah, great point. And there are lots of organizations out there that have that kind of negative culture that is quite constrictive. I think there's one of the terms that we often get involved in, the psychological safety of whether it's a marketing team or the sales team to kind of innovate, and they'd love to, but they feel they can't for whatever political reason internally. And the number of times we've sort of showed that if they did this, is what the impact would be, but they'll say no, can't do it. We're not allowed to. It's like yeah, exactly. So hopefully that will change. And we've seen at COVID that some organizations have had to change. They've had to change their thinking in that sense. So they've been forced to do it. I mean, it would be, back to your original point, but it would be nice, wouldn't it, from a value point of view, to think that they've done that off their own backs. But I think some of them financially have been forced to rethink things and go, well, we need to be innovative. We need to kind of think about things differently. But there's a lot of opportunity there. But again, I think there's lots of, as you say, lack of freedom in that respect.
Well, listen, thank you so much indeed. That's been a fascinating discussion. I feel we could go on for days, but we're going to have to bring it to a close. Before I do, I obviously want to thank Val Brown, Minter Dial, and of course, Dr. Simon Moore, Maria and Jordan, and everybody behind the scenes bringing this production together. Of course, a record of this will be going out to all the Think Global Forum members around the world, and also available publicly, but we do thank people for joining us live today as well. Before I go, I just want to ask each of you, if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way of them reaching out to you? So maybe Val, I'll ask you first.
Great. LinkedIn always, or valbrowngroup.com.
valbrowngroup.com. Thank you, Val. Maybe Minter, where's the best place people can reach you?
Well, I write on minterdial.com, blogging for 15 years. I got a podcast you listen to, Minter Dialogue. I'm writing a new book on Substack about conversation, which you can find. It's called Dialogos, and otherwise M-Dial on all of the socials.
And I see the You Lead book behind you, which is another book that you wrote, which is, I certainly would recommend. It's a great book. And Dr. Simon Moore, where can people find you?
I'm on LinkedIn, or you can reach out to me at simon@innovationbubble.eu.
Very good. Well, listen, thank you, everybody. It's been an absolute pleasure to be part of this roundtable discussion with you. I've thoroughly enjoyed the chat, and I really appreciate your time. So thanks for joining us here for the Think Global Forum.